Hello and welcome to DigFin VOX, Voices in Digital Finance. I'm your host, Jame DiBiasio. If you enjoy the program, give us a like and let YouTube know all about it. My guest today is Elsa Pau. Elsa is founder of BlueOnion, a Hong Kong-based fintech focused on sustainable investment and ESG. We talked about her background as a publisher, moving into data analytics, asset management, and the complexities of using technology to solve for sustainable finance needs. Elsa Pau, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to DigFin VOX.
Thanks for having me, Jame.
So look, I'm looking forward to this because you're a special interviewee for me because we both come from similar backgrounds in media and covering the asset management industry in parts of our careers for you. It's been a big part of your career. And now you've made the transition to technology entrepreneur, which is very exciting. So I want to talk about you and how you got into this story, really. You became the story yourself. So tell us just a little bit about your work at Benchmark, the work that you've been doing in the asset management field, and then we'll get into the tech story and, of course, the big issues around ESG and sustainable investing.
Of course. Yeah, so I actually came from the asset and wealth management space. And then I kind of retired from the field, and then I found something very exciting at that moment, which was publishing, something that's happening, on a daily basis, covering what's happening in the finance industry. It was very exciting, and we were very much interested in understanding what the asset managers were doing and how they are picking their stocks, because the end of the day, they're acting on behalf of the individual investors and finding these individual companies for them. So we're very interested in understanding how they are conducting their due diligence on these listed companies or private companies, and how they are exercising their stewardship and fiduciary duties. So we started covering a lot of that due diligence side of things and Benchmark, the publication. And then we started running some recognitions like awards, but with a very, very meticulous due diligence process. So very quickly, very soon we evolved into looking at 5 major pillars in assessing these managers. So not only about hindsight, their previous performance, looking in the rear mirror, but also looking at their ability to withstand these black swan events and how they're conducting their strategies and preventing these unnecessary risks for the investors. So very soon, Benchmark became a consortium where the buy and the sell side would communicate. When they are pitching for these awards using their strategies, or their flagship strategies, they would be able to illustrate at length for the buy side to understand how they are conducting their risk management, their stress testings, how are they actually holding these senior managers accountable for style drifts, and whether or not their teams are stressed, and especially in some of the very busy sectors like the tech sectors and the property sectors, whether they are having sufficient resources to conduct their research and to engage with the underlying companies.
Right.
So,
And there's a whole consulting industry out there that also does this, but I guess you had a different commercial driver, perhaps no conflict of interest around trying to win mandates for other things.
Correct. So we engaged about 100 buy-side users, buy-side members on our platform who are advisors and judges for us. So they all have inputs to the building of the criteria and the metrics. And when they have to look at these submissions and they have a face-to-face opportunity to interview these managers, they have a better understanding of the strategies they've already onboarded, and or to also have the opportunity to onboard some new dark horses.
Right. So even though you're in the publishing world, you've been kind of knee deep in data and data analysis for a long time.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then what was the point where you saw an opportunity to turn a publishing, data-led publishing business into something more of like a tech company?
So about 4 years ago, after we were conducting these awards for a long time, the judges started saying to us, they said, all the data you've collected and all the analysis that we're conducting together, it looks like it's a treasure, right? It's so much data, so much analytics, so much algorithm being put into the process. Are you sharing the data? And I said, I'm already sharing it, but they said, well, it's in PDF. We can't possibly compare these strategies with using a PDF. So at the beginning, we were thinking about just displaying the strategies that we've integrated to the process. But I found out that it's a huge amount of work. So why not be a little bit greedy and take on the whole world so that most of our buy-side users can start looking at investment opportunities outside of Hong Kong or outside of Singapore or Taiwan, because a lot of them are from the private banking space. So there's basically very little limits that they need, that they're restricted to look at.
What are the issues you see with dealing with asset managers when they're dealing with ESG? What's the feedback that you get from talking to these institutions? What are they struggling with the most?
Well, the larger houses, they're better resourced, and they're HQ'd outside of Hong Kong. They have a lot of resources. They just follow, what's being handed down to them. But I see the struggles with the small mid-tier managers, local boutique managers. First of all, they are trying to recover losses from before COVID to get back to that level, and then you have the regulators giving them a very, very short timeline to comply with reporting, and then they now the market is even going more crazy. In short, a response to your question is that some of them are quite angry and frustrated because they don't know what's going on. Excuse me. And then if you have 200 companies in your portfolio, and you're about to engage with 100 and 200 of these the companies, and you're trying to get them to give you their carbon footprint, it's a hell of a job for them to do within 18 months. So yeah, it's not very nice at the moment. It's quite confusing. And I think most of them what they would do is they'll buy from a brand name to just hand over to the regulators for compliance purposes. But that doesn't really help them to genuinely get down to the portfolio and engage with these companies for better results.
But what exactly is in this portal? Like what kind of data are you putting in, and what is the way that you're digitizing it so that you can make it, I guess, either machine readable or something that you can analyze through an algorithm rather than just putting on your green visor and going one by one?
Yeah. So it's a pretty cool portal, and because it was driven by the buy side, it's very much buy side driven. So we were looking at a few, basically to start with screening the universe. So the way that they can screen it is first of all by way of exclusion. So I don't want to see any alcohol, any adult entertainment, or any firearms in my portfolio. So I'm just going to dial it out. Or I have a little bit of tolerance for alcohol, so I just dial it down to 5% or something.
I have a large tolerance for alcohol, but that's just me.
Yes, so you can dial it up all the way to 20%. That's the maximum. And then with these controversial business involvement, you can screen out the bad companies, the bad involvement, which is what we call the values alignment. Typically, a lot of the private banks and the high net worth individuals would want to see that, don't want to see any fossil fuels or cluster bombs in their portfolio. And then you can also screen by the conventional metrics like returns, standard deviations, Sortino ratios, and then whether it's Sharia compliant, et cetera, et cetera. So you can screen by conventional way of returns, the manager tenure, and also by ESG. You can take it all the way down to the top 10 percentile, 30 percentile ESG or global compact, the United Nations Global Compact. And the part that I like most is the temperature alignment, right? So for managers or investors who says, I'm not going to support any fund managers who don't care about global warming, right? So I'm just going to dial out all of the non-aligned funds, meaning that for the 2030 and the 2050 pathway, before COP26, it was 1.5 and 2 degrees for us. But after COP26, it's now all across the board 1.5 as alignment.
Yeah. So now let's start to tie these pieces together. You've gone from data gathering as a publication to creating a digitized portal that allows people to have much more granular access to manager data. And then you're taking this to the ESG level, so environmental, social, and governance factors that people can include in how they search for managers. And I guess in terms of users, we're talking about private banks, but it could also be, I guess, institutional investors, pension funds, and so on. So they're using this tool to understand more in depth about specific managers, both at the company level, BlackRock or what have you, and then at the portfolio manager level, and then at the portfolio level. Is that right?
Correct. So in the upcoming version, we would give a lending hand to these asset managers when they're finding these underlying companies, integrating them to the constituencies. So basically, they would be able to screen out all the companies that are performing poorly by ESG and also non-compliant to the temperature score. But of course, in reality, they shouldn't just abandon those companies that are not doing too well yet. If they're financially sound and if they're good investment opportunities, they shouldn't just roll out these potential companies. Rather, they can use this tool to engage with them and to continue to track and monitor their progress and to help them and engage them to help them get to those goals and metrics and targets. So that is ultimately the better way to do it.
One of the big issues in ESG is just the sheer number of data sources, the unevenness of it, the lack of standardization, which people bang on about, but also just there's so many different metrics out there, and whether it's coming from Refinitiv or MSCI or some of the fintechs out there that are doing Sustainalytics and so on. There's a whole bunch of them, satellite imagery that it goes on. Where do you fit into this? And are you just yet another provider of data that fund managers are going to be inundated with, or is there something more to what you're trying to build using some of these tools?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. I was equally confused when all these providers came out with the different scorings, but for your audience, I think I need to bring up a point about standardization, right? I think it is very similar to you're looking at a Moody's rating of a company versus a Standard & Poor's ratings versus a Fitch rating, right? Mm-hmm. So every one of these rating agencies would have their own taxonomy, their own criteria, and the framework when they are looking at these companies. So we should not try to compel one provider to follow another because they have a bigger brand or they have more clients rather. So in the ESG world, it actually operates the same way. Each one of these provider, they would have their own taxonomies, they would have their own classification. So to give you an example, how these ratings become so different, it all starts with how these providers are classifying these companies. Which bucket do they belong? So for example, if they classify a conglomerate like a Swire in a food and beverage sector, versus another provider would classify Swire as a property management sector, all the different KPIs and materiality and the metrics will then become very different when they measure these companies. So if I'm a food and beverage company, of course, water becomes extremely material to me in the food and beverage sector versus a property management business, because that's more labor intensive, that's more a labor kind of thing. Um, and of course, you can put in all the emissions and et cetera that they can have an influence on. But the end of the day, the classification starts with these providers by revenue, by their geographical breakdown. So they all have different classification standards. So that's why when you have a company being interpreted very differently by their sectors, you therefore get a different materiality assessment and results, and thereby affecting your peer comparison, and thereby affecting a lower score or a higher score. So
if I'm a fund manager, though, how do I deal with that? Because I think the point that we're getting to here is that if you follow a credit rating agency, an S&P versus a Fitch, it's not going to be a big difference, or and Moody's might be one grade offers, but there's a certain they sort of track in within a narrow range of one another, because there is a certain sense of this is how we do it. Yeah. And also they're measuring usually a pretty specific question: is this issuer going to pay back the debt on time? So with ESG, it's not just that you've got different methodologies and different categories, but the range of outcomes and measurements is so broad, it's kind of hard to know what is true or what is acceptable. So how do you get around that issue?
So first of all, I would really encourage, whether it's individual investors or it's an asset manager, not to follow the scores that are that the providers are providing. If you are following the scores, then you must be very, very comfortable with the methodology, and you must agree with the classification of the sector, right? So there is no such thing as an approved data provider at the moment. So it's really up to the asset managers to understand the underlying methodology. So for BlueOnion, I use this analogy, I hope you don't mind using this analogy, is I look at the data collectors as fishermen, right? They're fishers. So they are there to collect data, and then occasionally they would have their own shop selling some of these fish that they caught. But we are not fishermen. We're not. We don't spread our nets out there in the ocean. However, we are a restaurant operator. We look at ourselves as, right? So we are kind of provider agnostic in a way. So if we want to serve sashimi on our menu, I go buy from Japan. If I want to serve salmon on my menu, I go buy from Norway. So we take on these underlying metrics rather than the score as is from these providers. So there's a lot of construction work behind, because every provider would have a different terminology about fatalities or accidents. And some would take on some certification, and some would look at the other certifications. So there's a lot of mapping work to do in the kitchen, right? But the end of the day is we wanted BlueOnion to be a platform where these asset managers can choose and simulate their portfolio using the underlying metrics rather than taking our scores as is. Now, yes, we do have a overall score for their convenience, but we have a very clear methodology. If they feel comfortable, by all means, follow our scores. If not, then we also offer other frameworks like the SASB, right? The Sustainability Accounting Standard Boards, which will then evolve into ISSB, and with the merges with many other frameworks. So there's over 200 taxonomies out there nowadays. So it can be very, very confusing. Yeah. So we offer the SASB, and then in some of our modules, such as the SFDR, which is my favorite at the moment, is the EU framework. Now, you might say, oh, it's EU, it's not relevant, but some of the managers with their UCITS fund, they would endeavor to try to get their Article 8 and Article 9 approved. So for your audience, very quickly, Article 8 is all these different metrics that prove that you are aligned, that you are actually integrating ESG across the board to your strategy. Now, Article 9 is a little harder, or I would say different, is when you are incorporating and you are creating positive impact in your portfolio. So those impact thematics are usually Article 9. And if you're claiming that you integrate ESG into your fund, that would be Article 8. Okay. So the EU has about 18 mandatory indicators, which are very, very clear that they can follow. So I like frameworks that are clear. Like, these are the 6 things that you cannot do, or you must have a minimum of this portfolio meeting 5 out of 10 of these United Nations Global Compact principles. So that way you have, for asset managers, there's a framework that you can lean on. And I think the SFC and Hong Kong regulators also consider internationally recognized frameworks such as the SFDR. So for asset managers who wanted to get started, they can use a framework like this and test drive their portfolio to see how green it is or how integrated it is.
What are the prospects for technology and fintechs to be able to make a difference here? What is the way you think that the sector can advance this story in a positive way?
There's so much data, and there's so many companies involved in this universe, and so many funds involved in this universe. Like I briefly mentioned, that you need to know that minimum 50% of your companies are abiding to 5 out of 10 United Nations Global Compact principles. I mean, thinking about that is daunting, right? So you can't possibly do it without AI or MLs or algorithms to help you keep track of these metrics, the deterioration of qualities of these companies. You need to be able to track them. And I cannot imagine any other ways than using technologies.
Yeah. So Elsa, this has been really interesting. You've taken a publishing business, turned it into a data business, turned it into a fintech that's helping asset managers get to the bottom of what's in their portfolios in a way that is going to help them going forward, both from a performance and from a reporting and efficiency point of view, and understanding, particularly around ESG. I guess last question for you then is, are you still in the publishing business, and do you see it, do you see you leverage publishing to go into tech? Will it go the other way around as well?
Yeah, good question. We have been publishing technical reports rather than a retail magazine. And then going forward with our new structure and investors, we will be reestablishing our editorial side of things, primarily featuring the landscape, what's happening, and giving people a little bit more ideas of where the current challenges are, and then giving them some highlights, what managers are doing well, what managers are not doing well. So, I haven't mentioned this word greenwashing, but this is ultimately the goal for us to help the world to become better by eliminating greenwashing elements, and also to help asset managers and investors to be genuinely become responsible investors. That's what we want to do.
Great. Well, Elsa, good luck with that. Good luck with BlueOnion. And thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Jame. Have a good day and stay safe.